last week, I went to Bowman Gray Stadium and tested the Next Gen car. I got out and I said, this car does everything better than anything I've ever driven. And I think I didn't want to really get too detailed in my thoughts about the car. I wanted to save that for the table here.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, man. You know, NASCAR invited me to go to Bowman Gray and drive the car. That was a bit of a favor. They had Tony Stewart there to do the tire test. That was the real objective, was to get a tire that they felt comfortable with for the clash that's going to be at the Coliseum in L.A. They didn't really need me or Clint to come, but they offered that to me and Clint as broadcasters and ex-drivers to get a little experience and understanding of the car. So we both were there, and I was very grateful and thankful for that. NASCAR didn't pay me to come. NASCAR doesn't pay me a dime for anything. I say that because I don't want people to think that I got to get out of there and I got to talk favorable about the car. I'm gonna tell you what NASCAR wants me to tell you, right? So when I got in the car and I drove it, I was really impressed by the braking. The brakes are giant. They're going to work better, right? I'm not surprised that they work better, but that was one thing that is completely different from what I've been driving. And as I drove around the track, I kept finding myself really over-slowing the race car. I would push the brake pedal to slow the car down, expecting the same type of braking performance that I'm used to, and the car would slow down much more than I thought it would. And so by the time I would get into the middle of the corner, I was much slower than I needed to be. So there was a lot of time for me to gain into the corner, and over time you would adapt as a driver. You would adapt to that braking performance within a day. I ran 20 laps in the car, and that was it. But that was the first thing that stood out to me immediately. The other thing that jumped out to me was I was unsure about how the bigger, wider tire and low profile tire, how this tire would perform. It's shaped differently than anything I've ever raced, ever. The car has a ton of drive, meaning that when I get into the gas pedal, the tires grip the track and drive the car forward down the straightaway. On a short track, especially something as small as Bowman Gray, which is a very, I think it's a quarter mile. So on something that small, which we never ran our Cup cars on, when you would go to the gas in an Xfinity car or a Cup car, it would light the rear tires up. You'd have a hard time trying to get the tires to grip the track. You would probably spin the tires all the way down the straightaway. You may never even get to wide open throttle because you could not apply the power to the ground and get the grip you needed. But this car with the wider tire, I would apply the throttle and the car would just launch forward. It wouldn't spin the tires. And I think that has a lot to do with the tire itself, but also the independent rear suspension, which I had never felt in a race car before either. The car hunkered down on the right rear and sat on the right rear and just gripped the racetrack and drove forward up toward the flag stand. That was really pretty impressive. So those are some good things. A few of the things that concern me, and I didn't want to get into it that day, but I'll be honest, all right? We're going to be clear about how I feel about this car, all right? So here's some things that might, are going to be challenging, right? The cars, these aren't broken things. These aren't things that NASCAR needs to address. But this is what's going to be a big hurdle if I were a driver. The steering in the car. So they've talked at length about having problems with the racks and different things. Well, what I noticed, and again, I've mentioned it and you're going to note it, I only had a brief moment in the car at a very unusual racetrack, right? I haven't drove it at Charlotte or a big mile and a half or anything like that. So take this for what it's worth. The steering doesn't turn far enough for me. You literally have about half of the degrees of rotation in the front tires that you might have in a car today, a current car. So when I try to steer the car to the left or the right, even in the garage, trying to get out of a garage stall, it turns only about half as far as a current car does.
Wow.
So it's hard to get out of spaces like a garage stall. It's hard to turn back. It's hard to get off the racetrack. driving the track, you don't notice it because you never get to full lock. You never get to that moment where the wheel stops turning. You're not turning the wheel that far. But if I was at a racetrack and got sideways and wanted to correct the car, I'm only going to be able to steer it far to a certain point. And maybe in some situations, not as far as I'd like to straighten this car out, to save this car from spinning. Because the steering rotation, or where you end up going, when you turn the wheel and get to full lock, is about, it feels like it's much less than the current car. There's a bigger tire, a bigger wheel. There's all kinds of probably limitations that are happening up in the front suspension that are not allowing you to get more turn, being able to steer the car more, turn the wheel farther. That could be something that we hear drivers comment on as they start driving this car, start racing this car, start crashing this car, start spinning this car out. Be ready to hear drivers say things about the steering lock and it not turning far enough, okay?
All right.
And just
so interesting.
Just be ready for that. Driving it under conditions in battle, it is not a problem. But trying to get in around the garage, out of your pit stall, get into a pit stall. If you can't, you get boxed in or something and really need to steer and turn the car far, are you going to have enough to get out of the stall? And if you have to, just be ready for that. So the other thing was the low-profile tires. So I talked about how the car, in social media, I said, the car does everything better. Now, we were only going 55, 60 miles an hour around that racetrack. It brakes better, it has more drive, more grip. And people went, oh, it's easier to drive. That's no good. Well, that's not really the truth. So Tony Stewart spun the car out twice, right? I go up to Tony, and I said, hey, Tony, what's going on he's like, man, it just happens, and you don't even know it's happening. The challenge, I think, or the reason why Tony spun the car out and why he didn't see it coming, feel it happening, be ready for, why he wasn't able to stop it from happening, is because the sidewall of the tire is much shorter. It's a low-profile tire. This reminds me, these comments from Tony and talking to him more about spinning the car out and what that felt like, reminds me of all of the things that we heard when NASCAR went from a bias-ply tire to a radial tire. So, Mike, the bias-ply tire flexes more. The sidewall has more flexibility in it, okay? And so when the car starts to slide, the wheel would actually move in the tire, right?
Okay.
And there's a little deflection in the tire as you're starting to slide. And so that's why when you watch racing from the 70s or 80s, you see smoke, you see cars sideways, you see them driving the cars sideways, getting loose and coming out of those slides a lot more often than you would today. Well, that's because that tire allowed them to have more forgiveness because of its flexibility. And would malleable be the word?
That sounds good.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just going to defer to you on that.
Okay, so when they went to the radial tire is a lot stiffer, a lot harder for you to flex physically with your hands, and it's harder to mount. It's a much tougher tire to handle. And when you put it on the race car and fill it up with air, the sidewall does not flex as much. Drivers lost a lot of that forgiveness. They lost a lot of that sensation of when the car would get sideways, having a bigger box to work in those moments to save the car, or even drive the car sideways. You can no longer really do that with the radial because the sidewall had become stiffer. And drivers would all comment, if you go back in time and read those articles, I can't feel the car. It's spinning out before I know it. It snaps. There's no warning, all right? Over time, they adapted, all right? This was completely foreign. They didn't love it. But over time, they learned, after many miles, how to run this tire. And they learned what to pick up on to get that warning, right, and to understand where the limit was, and to understand how not to step over that line.
Mm-hmm.
We adapted, right, over decades, and the same if this tire's around for a while, the same will happen here. So when we get into racing, when we get into battle, you're going to hear drivers say things like, "I had no warning. I can't feel it. I can't tell when it's going to spin. I got a ton of grip, and all of a sudden I got none. I don't know when this thing's going to wreck," right? They're going to say all the things similarly to what we talked about or heard from drivers when they went to the radial. So that is another challenge. That is a good challenge, I think.
Sounds like it.
It's not a fun thing as a driver.
Sure.
It's not going to be a great experience to have to wander into that unknown and learn that and adapt to that. And you don't want to destroy cars trying to do it, right? That's a scary proposition. But it's going to be a minefield for some of those guys when they go out on the racetrack of understanding where the line is of where's the limit of grip and how to run as close to that without destroying your car.
Right,
So
and it'll be trial by error, but
will.
you got to figure out where the new edge is.
For sure. And if this, and so those are two things that kind of stand out to me
Well, those are significant.
as big
those
as,
are good.
as big
analogy.
challenges. Yeah. The car, otherwise, I want to drive it at bigger tracks to learn even more about it and have a little more information and feedback for you guys about that. But, I think it's going to be a pretty interesting year next year. And just keep your ear to the ground and read. When you're listening to drivers talk about the car, or you're hearing analysts or even crew chiefs and owners and so forth discuss the car, kind of read between the lines. And drivers are emotional. Drivers are going to hop. Drivers are going to overreact.
Be dramatic.
Be
Yeah,
dramatic
for sure.
Yeah, right. So
Some may say whiny.
right, we'll read between the lines a little bit, and it's going to be fun to sort of understand and listen how they handle this car and how they adapt to it. It's going to be there's going to be some good things that they're going to like, and there's going to be some moments that surprise them, and they're not going to have an explanation for it, or they're going to have to. It's going to be a learning process.
Yeah. So I got a couple things I want to say. One is next week's download is going to be dedicated for us just learning more about this next gen car. We've got some people like the engineer from Chevrolet who has been part of the project. Eric Warren is going to be here, and Austin Dillon, who's been, testing this car a lot for the Chevrolet folks, is going to be here, and we're going to just really kind of like unpack this car even to more detail than what Dale's doing now. But that's why I saw this opportunity that you had to go test it was so beneficial for all of us. One, to hear the feedback you're giving now, and also to really kind of build up a show for next week. I look forward to that. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and these may be quick no's, Dale, but any of the concerns that the drivers had brought up in the months past, like the firewall and the heat, were you in the car long enough to even be able to tell if that's an issue still?
No.
Okay.
I didn't drive the car long enough to really create an environment that the drivers are going to experience in the race. I cannot comment personally about what I think about the heat, but I do know that it is a massive concern for the drivers. It is a real concern and a real issue. We've heard about interior temperatures in these cars during testing. I've talked to drivers, and they've told me the numbers about how warm the car was inside. Physical data that backs up the concerns that the drivers have. NASCAR absolutely needs to address a way to cool the interior of the car. Mandating cool suits is a great thing, I think, even in today's car, but that is not a fix. I don't think NASCAR thinks it's a fix.
Right.
I know NASCAR is going to try to do more to try to get some of this air out of the interior of the car, try to cycle air in the interior of the car, or whatever they need to do to bring those temps down. 150 degrees inside a race car is too hot. Mm-hmm. That's happened on occasion during the few years that I've broadcast, having the opportunity to look at the temperature gauges inside the cars while the race is going on. 150 degrees is absolutely pushing the limits of these drivers physically, and it is a terrible thing for them to have to go through. It is not a healthy thing. for them to have to experience. And so we need to try to absolutely avoid getting toward that number if we can.
And they will.
There's going to be moments. You go to Chicago a couple years ago, and it's unavoidable. You can't control what's going on with Mother Nature, and you're going to have those 150-degree days every once in a while. But we need our average, I think, for these drivers to be much, much, much lower, 120, 125 degrees, if not even less.
Yeah.
For these guys on an average weekend. So that's something I'm worried about. I didn't want to really get into it too much because I didn't experience it. But
right.
One thing I do want to say is I'm trying to give myself opportunities to drive the car more. There's a lot of testing that's going to be happening at different racetracks. I think there's a Phoenix test and maybe a Daytona test or some other test for sure going on. Wherever they're testing, from now until I get back in the booth, I'm going to try my hardest to get behind the wheel of a couple Chevrolets and get some more time so I can be better in the booth. By no means am I trying to help any organization, or am I trying to get myself geared up to go run a race. I just want to learn about the car. I do not want to go into a broadcast booth. I don't want to be a broadcaster if I don't know what kind of race car they're driving.
Right.
Not fun.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Hey, I got one more question, if you don't mind me asking. Running at Bowman Gray.
Yeah.
Did it change your opinion, or did it influence you in any way, just putting laps at that place, knowing that they run every week there? And also, did it change your opinion or influence you in looking forward to the Clash at the LA Coliseum?
When they talked about going to the Clash, my immediate reaction, I was not a big fan of it. I was a little skeptical. That's a very tiny track. How would our cars adapt? It's just going to be them rolling around there. I mean, watching them go around there at 55, 60 miles an hour. I didn't know what that would be like. Will our drivers go out there and go for it? Right? Will pride be enough to implore them to go out there and make a show? Right? Or will they go out there and just log laps and do the dance and come home? We'll see. We'll see what happens. The car, when I drove, to answer your question, when I drove the car, I went, oh, this is going to be fine. This is fine. This car goes around this track. It's fun to drive around this track. This car will do great at the Coliseum. Our current Cup car, I wouldn't want anything to do with that. That car, with those trailing arms and that straight rear axle, or with that rear housing and trailing arm, they don't do anything. It's not going to do anything right around there. It's not going to do anything good around there. It's not going to stop. It's not going to go. It would be miserable to race around that little track. The independent suspension and things like that really make getting around that track funner, more enjoyable.
Good to know.
So I went from skeptical, not sure about this, to this is a good idea.
All right.
This is going to work.
All right. That's good.
That's my honest opinion.
That's it. That's all we need. Awesome.
And you turned some good lap times.
Oh, yeah. Matthew, let's talk about that. So Clint's there. We walk up. I talked to Clint, and I'm like, man, I called him earlier in the week, and I said, we need to get up to this race car and check the seat out, make sure it's going to fit. And he's like, I know. He's really worried. I'm worried. He's like, Stewart's really short. I'm like, I don't remember Stewart being that short. But he's like, yeah, he's a little short. He's like, man, we need to get up there, but I can't get up there. And I was like, I can't either. I'm just going to. So I called the RCR guy, where the car was at RCR's. I said, just bring a sheet of 1-inch foam, and if I got to stick some foam somewhere, that's what I'll do. I'm only going to run the car 5 to 20 laps. I just want to, I don't want to drive the car 100 laps. I'm just going to get in there and drive it, and when I feel like I got an understanding of what it's doing, I'm going to get out. Clint's like, yeah, I'm doing the same thing. So we get up there, and Clint's like, oh, I ain't going to go out there and go fast. I'm just going to go out there and drive it and get out and talk about it and go home. And I said, yeah, I think, Stewart's out there running hard, trying to push his car. He's spinning out, and he's trying to give them the best data they can to understand the tire and whether they're making the right choice for this clash. And it's NASCAR's next gen car. And I've always drove cars for most of my career that I felt like belonged to me or belonged to family, right?
Right.
And when you drive somebody else's car, it's a weird feeling, right? You don't want to tear it up. Anyways, I get in there and I ran, and they're telling me the lap times, and I knew Stewart ran some. Stewart's fast laps were like 15.2s, 15.3s.
Okay.
And then in lap 20 or so, or lap 40, he would drop off to the 15.5s. And so I was out there running, and I got down to a 15.6, and I thought, I better stop. I'm over my head. I've only run about 20 laps, and I don't know where the right side of this car is. I don't know where I am I don't know how close to the wall I'm getting on the straightaways. I don't want to hit anything. Mm-hmm. Tony got surprised by a couple spins. I don't want to spin and hit anything. Then Clint can't drive it, so I thought, all right, I'm in over my head, overdriving this thing, and maybe I should take a break. Hop back in a minute and go again. But I'm 15.6. I was pretty happy with that. Clint gets out there, and Matthew's there. Matthew's timing everybody, right?
Yeah.
And I'm watching Clint go around, and I watch him run like a corner or two. And then somebody asked me if I'd go upstairs to say hey to somebody's mother. And so I go upstairs to say hello to this guy's mom, and fan was up there, and he goes, Clint's done running by now. And this fan goes, hey, man, I saw you running better laps than Clint. And I said, did I? And he goes, oh, yeah, Clint was pretty slow. And I said, really? Well, that's nice to know. I was afraid to ask, because you were all competitive, right?
Yeah.
And if Tony, me, and Clint go to a racetrack and jump in a car, you don't want to be the slowest guy.
Right.
But I was afraid to ask. I was just going to ignore it and get out of there and never know. It's best to not even know.
Right. You didn't want to show your hand and let people know that it was in your mind. But we know that it's in everyone's mind.
Exactly. So I'm like, oh, all right, maybe I was better than Clint. I'll just take this guy's word for it, right? And so I come downstairs, and I'm on my way home. I'm driving home, and Dustin Long puts out an article. And in the article, Clint is quoted as saying, oh, I'm happy. They were like, Clint, are you happy? Did you enjoy the test? He goes, oh, yeah, I'm happy. I put 2/10 on Stewart, and I was a half a second faster than Dale.
Oh, my.
And I'm like, well, I know that's not true.
Right.
Because it's physically impossible,
right.
for one,
right.
to run faster than Tony did.
Right.
No damn way he got out there and ran 15 laps and beat Tony's time after Tony'd been in there for 100 laps, right? And so I text Dillner. And I'm like, Matthew, you were there. What did Clint do? And he goes, I was timing Clint. He never ran in the 15s. What did you say?
Whoa.
No, he got down. He was in the 15s, but
okay. What did he run?
He didn't run faster than you.
What did he run?
I don't know the exact time, but probably like 15.7, 15.
Okay.
I mean, he wasn't even the right gear the first 3 laps.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. He was in the wrong gear and all that.
Moron.
But I just love the fact that typical Clint, he comes out, oh, yeah, it's
That's
faster
hilarious,
than everybody.
Actually. That is actually very funny.
So the dude, this is Clint Bowyer in a nutshell.
Right.
Okay.
It's brilliant.
Hey man, I'm gonna go up there. I'm just gonna make my laps and get out. I'm gonna make my laps and go home. I ain't worried about running fast and all that. Okay, Clint, cool man. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
He gets in there and runs. Oh man,
claims he won the test.
I won.
Yeah, that Clint Bowyer stopwatch.
Yeah. I'm like, what? Totally threw me through the wolves.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I know a little bit about cars, so believe me when I tell you that Tire Pros, they're the real deal. They've got great people, great service, and they can take care of all your automotive maintenance needs. Plus, they're a sponsor of this show, so you know they got great taste in podcasts. So check out Tire Pros. Follow them on Facebook and tell them that I sent you.